Hey, Kristian.
Hey, what's up?
Watched Nuevo Rico a few times and I loved it. It's incredible.
We live in a world with very little freedom left, and we're always up to something. But music keeps us grounded.
Come to paradise, the land of your dreams. Ven a Nuevo Rico.
Chill, mama. Can't you see me vibing here?
Their music will change the world and carry with it the island's pride.
We got discovered mad quick.
I don't know how shit got so crazy.
Our lifeline is reggaeton.
By the blood of Daddy Yankee. It's a legit duo.
What does Nuevo Rico mean to you in your own words?
I think Nuevo Rico is like a state of mind in the sense that it's kind of like pointing towards like the future. Like I kind of think about sometimes like the idea of decolonization and how like sometimes places have been given names by others. You know, Puerto Rico is a complicated name because it's like, it literally translates to rich port. And so there's something kind of funny about calling it new rich, which is also something that happens in the hip hop world where like you suddenly have like Young Money and like in reggaeton, you know, like Young Money. So like something about saying new rich, Nuevo Rico, to me kind of spoke to the idea of like not only the state of mind of kind of pushing something forward to a new space, but also the idea of the double entendre being like, you know, new money. I think money is a weird thing in like communities that sometimes lack access to it because, you know, you don't get like any type of education on like how to deal with money. And then you're introduced to money. And then like, there could be like, there's just like this, we put a lot of burden on people to kind of almost understand how to navigate these worlds, you know, like when we look at our young talent, you know, that's kind of emerging, we burden them with lots of responsibilities really quickly. Yeah. And I think that's kind of just a trap of the music industry, which is kind of like a lot of what I think Nuevo Rico on some level is kind of playing with, you know.
You're bringing up the kind of different ways that Barbie and Vico respond to their state of being new money. So they're the fraternal twins of Nuevo Rico, but I also feel like another fraternal twin pairing is Puerto Rico, Nuevo Rico, and Miami.
Yeah, I like kind of think of Miami as kind of like the gateway. It's like where, like for a lot of artists and a lot of people, like getting to Miami is kind of like this big step. And it's kind of like it's one of the most Latino places in America, you know, like it's one of the most, like, it has like, it's almost like if you hit Miami, it's like a version of You Made It, you know, suddenly you have new audience and and I think that speaks to a lot of like cultural feelings that we have towards the place. Like, I think that's like a Latin American kind of feeling, like it's a migrant story in that way where we all kind of feel like Miami is kind of like a gateway to something, you know?
Well, in fact, that reminds me of a line that appears in the film, both in the beginning and at the end, is Patria o Muerte. And I'm curious what you think Nuevo Rico says about this.
I think there's like an idealism sometimes that people have where like, you have to kind of think about like what you lose when you go to certain places and spaces, you know? And so like, it's a kind of a personal question that everyone has to kind of ask themselves, like how much of yourself are you willing to lose when you go to these spaces, you know? And I think that's something that is truthful to all Latinx, Latino, Latina identity in general, right? Like it's something we all wrestle with because we're, you know, when you come to America, there's always, or what your relationship is to America, there's always like it's being challenged constantly by the society that you're living and inhabiting. So you have to kind of ask yourself that question sometimes, like, what part of you do you want to let die? What part of you do you want to live, you know? Right. Which is not that easy to answer. And it almost becomes personal. I don't think like, if you want to call it Latinx, Latino identity, we're not like a monolith. So like, it's hard to kind of like paint us as like one thing. But I think the question of like, you know, that particular question, like, it's like, it becomes sort of a personal thing, or like it speaks to the challenges of just like having to navigate these like spaces that might not welcome you. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how much of myself am I willing to lose in this interaction or in this navigating, like be it corporate spaces, be it the music industry, be it, you know, because somebody else is sometimes paying the check. And then like, it's like, you know, in the music industry, it might be like a situation where like they're telling you to be a certain type of way or a certain type of, you know, and I think that's kind of like what the characters are going through the most likely, like this idea of how authentic do they stay versus not, you know, having had like a grandfather who might have more like grit, you know, which I think it's true to like a lot of our experience, you know, like where our, those that came before us kind of had it a little bit harder and made it easier for us. And they kind of paved some road, but then like, you know, it's kind of like that feeling like, should we like honor that and push that forward? Or like, you know, that is a confrontation always to some degree, you know, and it's a personal one, I think.
So I was struck that this film, the short film, is one of the first Latinx Futurism pieces in media. And I'm wondering, what do you think are the defining qualities of Latinx Futurism?
For me, Latinx Futurism is the idea that we don't have to be boxed into like one monolithic like identity, and that it can be a challenge of like perception and a challenge of like, in media especially, I think like in media, oftentimes when we think of like what a Latinx story is, it's very much like even maybe by us or by other people, you know, in the community or outside of our community, there's almost like this feeling of like, it has to check a certain box. And I'm kind of allergic to the box, like, you know, like personally, like I kind of almost feel better when we don't have to act as like, you know, we're kind of limited by our storytelling, you know? I think that's a big problem in media. Like sometimes people want to just overly label something and then like, it doesn't give you the room to breathe. So like, I think Latinx stories can be magical. They can be surrealism. They can be wizards. Why not mesh all this aesthetics? I feel like for a long time, like white people have just been able to like kind of define everything and play everywhere. And they don't have the burden of like having to present, you know, like they have the burden, like they get to be default, you know, and by that defaultness, it kind of strips everyone away from the ability to also kind of explore, you know. When I look at futurism, it's a very important part of it is just like being able to see your identity painted into the future. And that it has inspired a lot of people.
I'm wondering if there are any Latinx Futurism references that provided creative inspiration for Nuevo Rico.
I mean, I definitely, I worked with Bad Bunny and I definitely like been following his work for a while. So like, I feel like he has a little bit of that going on. Like he reminds me of Sun Ra, you know, Sun Ra, who was like Afrofuturist, you know, like in the jazz scene. Like he's kind of almost like our modern equivalency to that in some bizarre ways. I think reggaeton in general, where it's going, is what inspired that. Because it's very synthy, it's pushing boundaries, it's always like kind of like going places we don't expect anymore, you know, which is like kind of the beauty of reggaeton right now. Like it's kind of become such a global musical movement that it doesn't mind genre bending. I could talk about that a little bit too, because I kind of have thought about this a lot, where like it might connect to the film too, like Nuevo Rico, Puerto Rico, like because of the diaspora, it amplifies things. So the music travels faster. And that was kind of something I thought about when I was making the film, where like how it moves culture quickly, musically, you know, across the states because of the diaspora being able to like play the music in different barrios and different places across America. And then it spreads fast. So there's like an amplification that happens sometimes.
There's that scene in the short film where you see both Barbie and Vico have uploaded a song and it's been 15 hours and they haven't had any views. It's like they haven't blown up yet, you know? I wanted to round up the interview just by asking about the inflections in the film of both Taino gods and Yoruba religion. Who brought, like, where did that come from? Who brought that to the table, and why do you think it's essential to the story?
I think it's really important to kind of like in the idea of reclamation of identity sometimes, being a kind of I do think of it as a film of decolonization, to kind of just look at our own identity and look at our Afro-Indigenous roots and kind of honor that, you know? And so there's a lot of rich mythology in our culture. And oftentimes when I look at media, it's like Greek gods, or I don't know, our mythology is kind of almost erased, you know? And so making a film where they're kind of front and center kind of highlights it, and then it becomes an act of reclamation in a film, you know? So it kind of behaves that way a little bit. It's definitely, I'm not shy that it's a protest film to some degree, you know, where it does have a little bit of that energy where it's like trying to reclaim something that is lost, you know, or has been lost. And we're always trying to like negotiate that in our lives, you know, or especially right now, it's like really important, I think, like to understand and deconstruct what colonization has done to our people, and like not lean into like certain, you know, negative aspects of it, but rather like kind of lean into trying to restore ourselves or kind of find ourselves, you know. Yeah, I'm really particularly like always thinking about the Tainos because if you're you know, from the Caribbean, you have like, you know, a deep connection to that, you know, that's kind of like part of our lives, and it's kind of reflected in our culture and our, you know, and we're kind of like almost a byproduct of that too, you know, so that's kind of like a big part of our identity.
I was taken by how not only was Nuevo Rico produced during COVID, but it was also internationally. And so as you're talking, Kristian, about decolonization, this film being about that, I wonder just like how these dynamics of working internationally and this film being about decolonization, like how they're playing out for you.
So I think it's just important to have like diverse teams, you know, like in the texture of a film, you know, like it's just, especially in animation. The animation world is like, you know, just not diverse, you know? So like you have to kind of present and create these opportunities for people to kind of be able to like do the thing they love, you know, in spaces. I'm really big on mixed media and like find new aesthetic. So that was kind of like what we were like really pushing for. It was kind of like a dream team, honestly. Like it was kind of like, yeah, I think that that's a strong act of decolonization because like, especially in, I guess, what is considered the American canon of animation, because it's almost like a challenge to it, like saying like, you always hear the same BS where it's like, oh, we can't find these diverse artists, and like, how can I construct a team full of it, you know? Like, I'm not as big an entity as like, you know, these institutions that exist, but somehow it becomes baffling for these enormous institutions to figure it out. And it's like, yo, I'm one person, I figured it out. You could do it. You have vast resources